I literally kicked the door open and my boyfriend was asleep. And I was like, baby, get up. This man canceled the interview because he don't. I mean, like, I was crunk.
Yeah.
And he literally said, I know you're gonna do something about it, so let me go back to sleep.
Things keep getting better.
All right, look, I'm just going to call it. Karamo Brown really is the most interesting of the Queer Eye guys. Not only was he the very first black gay man on American reality TV back on MTV's The Real World in 2004, he's also worked as a social worker. He founded the organisation 6 in 10 to give mental health support to those affected by HIV, and he has one of the most remarkable paths into fatherhood you will ever hear. Also, he starts and ends all interviews with a gigantic hug.
Oh, see, that feels much better. This is good.
Nice to meet you.
This is Tim. Tim also wants a hug.
You're getting one.
Things keep getting better.
When was the first moment that you realised that there was power and visibility, that simply being who you are in front of a camera could have power?
I didn't learn it from being in front of the camera. I learned it originally just being a little young African American gay boy in the South to immigrant parents with a unique name. So the neighborhood I grew up in was predominantly white. And so first of all, they would come in, they would say, what kind of name is Karamo? And so right then and there, I had to feel proud of my name and say, you know what, this comes from my background and it comes from African roots and I have to be proud of that. And so at first I would fake that proudness. I'm not gonna lie to you because
Really? Fake it till you make it?
I had to fake it because I was in these spaces where I was like, I just want to fit in. I'm a child. I didn't understand, but I had the pressure of knowing that I needed like present that I'm okay with who I am. And eventually, I did become okay with who I am. By me doing that, it changed the culture of my schools because now teachers and students weren't able to get away with making comments because they knew I was proud of who I was. They weren't allowed to just give me a nickname because they were lazy about learning my name. They had to learn my name. And so for me, visibility has always been something that I've used as a tool to show people that respect and love and empathy is always the first step you should take when meeting other people.
As I understand it, and you should absolutely feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you came out when you were about 15 years old?
Yes, so I don't use the term coming out.
Okay, so what's the
So
appropriate
I actually use the term when you let people in your life. It's a small shift in language, but I think that words have power.
Yeah.
It takes the power away from someone else of accepting or denying you and says, you have the power again. My granny used to say, if someone doesn't want to come in your house, you still have your home. And it's the truth. If you don't want to come into my life because I've let you know who I am, I'm gonna close that door and I'm still gonna be in the house that I built, which is my temple, and I'm gonna love myself.
Such a great term. What was the learning curve like for people around you then, as you opened up the door and you let them in?
Yeah, it was hard. You know, like I said again, coming from an immigrant a family, and growing up in the South of America, people often had adverse reactions to me letting them into my life regarding my sexuality. So even like when I started to let my father into my life, who had a very adverse reaction, we don't have a relationship at all now because he's never been able to reconcile his relationship with church and with his son who's proud and openly gay. And I remember I used to fight with him. And I used to think to myself, I'm not winning. And I meant in the sense of not winning the fight.
Yeah.
I realized that my arguments with him weren't adding better grades, weren't adding more money in my bank account, weren't putting gas in my car. And I was like, I'm not winning.
Yeah, you're in total deficit all the time.
I'm total deficit. I'm just giving to you the energy I could be using in other places. And that was the first, I remember it very vividly, 16, 17, being like, enough.
I definitely sense that Karamo has a lot of discomfort with his sexuality and he feels the need to sort of hide it.
Then the next big moment I had was I was on MTV's Real World, which is a popular show in the States, and I remember watching it back. And it was the first time I had seen my life and my actions edited. And for the first time in my life, I got to see it. And I thought to myself, I don't want to be that guy.
Real World is interesting because Real World was the first time your son saw you, wasn't it?
That is the first time my son saw me.
So I guess the context around here is that you had a child very young, you didn't realize you had a son, and he and his brother are now very much part of your life. But What do you think his first impressions of you were? Because he only saw you on that show long before he met you.
Yeah, it's funny, my son and I had this conversation. So my son's mother was the first and only girl I dated when I was 15, right before I started letting people into my life and my sexuality. We were children, and our family members made the choices to keep us apart. And she moved away, and years later, when my son was 9, I found out about him through child support papers, and then
What a
met
great
him.
way, by the way.
I know,
like
crazy.
so wonderful.
Yeah, crazy. It was a wild moment. And then through our meetings, got full custody of him. And while we were going through that process, I did find out that he was watching me on the show. And I was scared because I was thinking to myself, well, he saw me at a point where I was growing, and I don't want him to think that's what his father is. And I'm actually happy now in hindsight, because anytime he makes a mistake, he always says, but you know what, I'm gonna grow through this. I remember you, Dad, when you were 22. And I'm like, oh, cha-ching. Yes, you're right, you can be better. Because I'm better now, you can be better. And that's phenomenal. In the little sheet I got to learn about you, you wrote something that I thought was really interesting. You wrote, I'm scared to let my team down.
What's the best lesson you've learned about men, masculinity, since you started Queer Eye?
That it's toxic.
Yeah?
Yeah. Toxic behavior is something that has been ingrained in us since we were children. I remember this story vividly of when I was playing football. It was the first time I ever injured my leg. I mean, I was in pain. And my coach was literally screaming at me, Brown, shake it off, walk it off, don't cry, get up. And I was like, limping, wanting to weep, and I couldn't. In that same moment, no joke, this girl was running around the track doing hurdles, and she tripped over one of the hurdles, and literally everyone ran around her. The same coach that had told me to suck it up and was like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Everyone was, and I was thinking, I'm equally as hurt, but yet you told me that I can't feel. And I realized that dealing with the men that we work with on Queer Eye, every single one of them have been told that if you feel, you're not a man. If you want to have self-care, you're not a man. If you don't address women in a certain way, you're not a man. If you're not about finances and sex, and you're not a man. And I'm like, this skewed definition of masculinity has to die. Let's literally shoot it in the head and bury it, and allow men to be reborn as amazing creatures that support and love each other and love women and check in with themselves.
This image, one that has become all too familiar. Students evacuating with their hands up.
The high school you went to at the moment is extraordinarily famous. It's the same high school that was the location of the Parkland shooting. Are you at all surprised that that school has turned out a generation of activists that have gotten further with gun control in the US than almost any other group? Does it surprise you that that school produced kids that can do that?
Not at all.
Why?
Because a lot of people don't know that my high school was named after an activist. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas was an activist who worked her entire life to save the Everglades. And she was an environmentalist. And so as students, we were constantly taught that you have a voice, and you have to use that voice to not only help yourself get what you want, but to help others have a better life. And so the minute that happened in my school, I woke up that morning terrified for myself, for my sons who were on their way to school, but also for my community that I loved in my high school. And immediately I saw the kids come forward, and I was like, that's my school. And we're in a spot now where we see the shift as a culture, where people are like, enough is enough. The tradition in America, and I know that's not globally, there is a tradition with guns. And some places where hunting is something that people use guns for, there are people who use guns responsibly. So I'd be ignorant to say that I want all guns to be taken away. What I want is for us as citizens to have a voice with our politicians and say, help us to make sure that guns are not in the wrong people's hands. Help us to make sure that no child at 18 should have access to get a gun. We can't even get licenses to drink until you're 21 in the States. Yet we're saying you have the mental capacity to handle a gun at 18? No. So we need to just reform the legislation to make sure that we're being more responsible. And I think it starts with stop dividing and making it being, I'm trying to take something away from you. Again, I'm not. I just want us to work together to protect our future generations.
You, sir, are an absolute pleasure to talk to.
Oh,
thank you so much. Really
You're
enjoyed it.
amazing. Thank you.